This is a Business's Mission podcast. Business's Mission. I'm Gort, your host.
The transition from living for God to living with Him. It's not complicated, but it's life-changing.
Listeners, it's a joy to be back with you today, and it's especially my joy to introduce today Paul Unsworth. He has been one of my heroes. I interviewed him for our book, BAM Global Movement, and that's about around 10 years ago. And here is a Baptist pastor who started a lunchroom, Kahaila, downtown London. And before you say a word, Paul, I want to tell our listeners, quite a few Dutch people, pastors, went to Kahaila to get inspired by you. So there are a few Kahaila types initiatives now in the Netherlands who are one of my favorites. Remmeltmeijer, Hemelsbreed, and there are others, Carol and Hans Euser in the Rotterdam South with Blend. So very welcome, Paul.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. Thanks, Gay. It's lovely to see you again and have this conversation together. That's great.
Yes, and Bill, you are freshly back from a trip overseas to China, and it's really good to have you. And I'm looking forward to your remarks as my wonderful sidekick. You have always something interesting to say, so I'm sure you won't disappoint us this time. But Paul, please, what made you as a Baptist pastor decide to start a lunchroom in this, in this multicultural street downtown London?
Yeah. Well, I think I'd just become ordained as a Baptist minister, and I was thinking about what kind of church could I lead that either I wouldn't kill it or it wouldn't kill me. And I say that jokingly, but I think it was at the time I hadn't long been in ministry, and the minister there, sadly at a young age kind of passed away, and it was a kind of very needy area of East London, and I suppose it just there's a whole number of different things, not just that, but made me think about what kind of minister was the Lord calling me to be. I think also just seeing at that time that the dying generation of the church were people in their 20s and 30s. And so I was just thinking about how do you begin to do a church for unchurched people? And that started by just going down Brick Lane. One Sunday morning, I bunked off church as a naughty youth pastor, and I went down to Brick Lane and just saw, it was incredible. I saw people out tarot card reading, spiritual healing going on. There were other faith groups evangelizing, saying, come and hear about this faith. But what struck me is there was no Christian witness, because at 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning, all the good Christians at least are in church. And so it just raised the question for me, what is the rest of the world doing when we just gather as the church? And are there different ways that we can do church to encourage people to come in? I didn't grow up in a church, and about 15, 16, I started to go to church, and I had to assimilate to a culture in order to belong. In fact, I always joke about this. I went back a few years ago to preach at the church that I became a Christian in, and they said, "Oh, you were so naughty when you were young." I was like, "What? What do you mean?" And they said, "Well, and I just couldn't work it out. I thought I wasn't taking drugs, I wasn't sleeping around. Like, what was I doing that was so naughty?" And then it dawned on me that I hadn't learned the rules of how to behave in church because I didn't grow up in church. And they perceived that as being naughty. And it's not that I was naughty, I just didn't know the rules. And I think I realized that often we ask people to assimilate to a culture in order for them to belong. And I think belonging is like such a foundational element of exploring belief or faith. So how do we kind of create spaces where people can belong regardless of what they believe? And in that space, people go on a journey to discover faith. And that's why we set Kahaila up in the form of a coffee shop on Brick Lane 14 years ago.
I think that's what makes me so, I had this kind of glorious introduction, but you are one of those people, that I'm really, why I so believe in business. To be out there in, among people. I actually talked today with a former director of YWAM Europe, Jeff Fountain, and he said, we need to be out there. We have even in YWAM, the schools of how to disciple, how to grow, but we need to be out there in the marketplace. We need to be out there in society, influencing society. And so you have those words that I'm like, yeah, that's what I want to say.
Yeah.
How does it ring with you, Bill?
It was bringing back memories. I was just introduced to church when I was 21 years old out in California, and it was also a Baptist church, and I knew none of the vocabulary. The extremely positive experience was these people absolutely loved me. It was just palpable. It was very, very attractive to me. But I did realize they had a whole culture I knew nothing about that involved the way you talked, the way you dressed, and the way you spent your free time and all that stuff. So I was in the Navy at the time, so I had to go through something of a culture shock to learn how to fit in very well. And but then you skipping church and going out and finding out what are actually happening in our city. I love that courage because it takes courage to look around and see what is actually going on and then be willing to step into something new, being really led by the Lord to be a vehicle of his love expressed to the people who have no clue what the culture of the church is like and they will never get it.
Yeah.
So Paul, what happened? Here you were walking through Brick Lane, I've been there. So it's for those who don't know London, it's a very multicultural area, right? Downtown London. And so what happened? Did you pop in the idea of a bakery, or do you like pastries, or what happened?
Well, I mean, at the time, I shouldn't really tell people this, but I drank instant coffee. So I had to go and learn. I mean, for me, it was always at the heart of everything is a vision for people and how to see them come to faith. But I remember when I was at college, I won an award as like best entrepreneur out of 100 students. And so there was this desire to always kind of, innovate and come up with creative ideas. Always kind of, people say visionary. I remember when I was a child at school, I used to, in my school reports going, Paul was always daydreaming. Whereas now that for doing the same thing, I'm a visionary, it's like this kind of, turning a negative into a positive, I suppose. But it was just thinking about, if you're going to create a space where people belong regardless of what they believe, what's the best environment for that? And I think it was a coffee shop. That's why we chose a coffee shop, because people share life over coffee. If one of your friends phones you up and says, hey, I'm going through a hard time, you say, okay, let's meet up for a coffee. And, and so the idea is that we wanted to plant a church in the form of a coffee shop so we could be at the center of that. And then, so we opened in 2012. As a business, it just grew. We were doing like 4 times as much business than we anticipated in the first 3 months. We were able to pay back a £50,000 loan in the first 18 months. I don't know where all that money's gone now, by the way. It's not like we have that much profit now, but I think God just really was just all over it. And from that, we then felt what does church look like? What does ministry look like for us in that environment? And I think I remember really clearly God saying that the way that we obey the great commission of going to make disciples of all nations is so obeying the great commandment, which is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And which then raised the question of, well, who are our neighbors? And then as the pastor of the church, the way I describe it now is that for me, as I got to live my God dream, now how do I help other people live their God dreams? From that, one young woman had a heart to work with women who were involved in sex work in the area. And then after we employed her a day a week to go and start working with these women. 3 to 6 months later, she came back and says, can we employ them in the cafe? Because what they need is an alternative means of income, which is a no-brainer when you think about it. But I said, well, it's quite awkward. If this is an area where they're known for sex work, it'd be quite difficult if now they're selling coffee. So you can imagine the tension. So I said, but we sell so much cake. Why don't we set up a bakery? And so we set up a bakery. I knew nothing about baking. I knew nothing about a bakery. But when we started Kahaila, I didn't really know anything about running a coffee shop. But we did. And then from that, we also set up another project where we created safe houses for survivors of human trafficking and a prison and mentoring education program. And so we did all that within the first 18 months when we were a church of just 20 people and everyone were in their 20s apart from me. I was in my 30s, me and my wife. But yeah, so that was crazy. But yeah, just incredible. Like at the same time, just seeing how business and could set up new social enterprises, new other businesses, or just new charitable projects, with the profits from the business. So, yeah. But yeah, it got more challenging. I think with COVID came as well, there's a number of tensions. So a lot of that stripped back. At the time, we were invited by the City of London to open a new cafe that they were building in the city because they loved what we were doing in Brick Lane. So they said, could we come and do that in this part of town? So I think in the first 3 or 4 years, probably like around the time that we met Yugi, it was just all wonderful, amazing things happening, seeing people come to the faith, seeing people being set free from all kinds of, difficult backgrounds. So it was an incredible journey.
So before I see already the downward coming, and our listeners too. Oh, there's more to the story.
It comes back up great. As well, though.
But before going into that, how do you do that in a cafe? I mean, when you are running a cafe, you're busy. How did you integrate faith and the meaningful conversations? How can you do that while you have to run a business?
Yeah.
Can you give one or two examples how you did that?
Yeah, interestingly, I think what was the most effective is when people who were coming into the cafe were seeing the things that we were doing. Like when they saw that we were helping people out of sex work, when they saw that we were helping people who survived human trafficking, that just massively opened up conversations. People are like, why are you doing this? And firstly, I think this is in the book, but I think firstly, when you're just serving people coffee, that opened up conversations. And I remember I was just having more conversations with people in a week than I had as a youth pastor in a church for a year, people who didn't know Jesus. And so it was incredible opportunity. But I think as we went along and developed these projects, I think it was incredible when people like going, oh, this is what it means to be a Christian. Like, why are you doing this stuff? And one funny story that I always share is that there's these people from outside were volunteering, but they were atheists, but they loved what we were doing, so they were like volunteering however they could. And we had a church weekend away, and one of them came up to me just before and says, hey, Paul, I want to come on a church weekend away. I said, yeah, that's fine. But just to let you know, all we're going to do is worship and pray to Jesus. And he says, yeah, that's fine. I want to come along. And over that weekend, towards the end, he says, hey, Paul, this is God to me. Like when he's just seeing us together. And at the time, I didn't think it was the right time to try and correct his theology, because at the start of the weekend, he's an atheist. Now he's going, this is God to me. And so it's amazing. But then when we got back, the other guy who'd been volunteering, he just came up, he goes, Paul, why didn't you invite me to the church weekend away? I said, well, mate, because I know you're an atheist and like we're just going to worship and pray. So I didn't think you want to come. And he goes, that doesn't matter. Like, you should have invited me. And I'm saying, mate, I'm sorry, I really should have. And next time I will. But what that really spoke to me, as I say, is that when people seeing us doing the things that Jesus did, they want it. They want to be a part of that. And through that, they come to know Jesus. And so I think this is why I think the church often needs to get outside of the buildings a bit more and be more visible in doing the things that Jesus did. But also, my other point in that is that I think people need to create space to allow others to bring. What I mean by that is I think often as Christians, we love to help people, because like we love Jesus and that's what we did Jesus do. But often we put ourselves in a position of power of like, how do I help you? As if to imply that, our lives are together and we've got it sorted and let's go and help those people whose lives are not so well together. But what if we created space where as Christians, we put ourselves in a position where we need the help of others and say, can you help us as we help homeless people? Can you help us as we help people, ex-offenders? Can you help us? And then people go, yeah, I want to help with that. And so then they journey alongside and then ask the questions, why are you doing this? And then we get to share something of why we do that, is because we love Jesus, and it's exactly what we think Jesus is calling us to do.
So, Bill, does that bring back memories of your time in, or, even now, the last weeks that you were in China, what did you see happen in this whole area in bringing people in?
Well, yeah, in the broader category, what I hear Paul describing is he's learned that discipleship works a lot better by demonstration than by classes and teaching.
Yeah.
And that whenever you demonstrate the life of God to anybody, it always goes noticed. They may not like it at first, but the human heart is attracted to life. And when we're walking with the Lord, we're walking in life. He's promised that we'd have a lot of life. And so that experience is really there. It spreads out. The scriptures talk about it like being an aroma of Christ.
Yeah.
And when you do that in the coffee shop, it's not just the coffee that people are smelling. It's the love of God as well. And so I just absolutely love another set of stories of how people were discipled almost unintentionally just by exposure to people who are walking with God and manifesting his love to everyone and opening the door, not being judgmental, not restricting who you let into the club, because it's no longer we have authority to do that. We have responsibility to just walk with him, and he loves everybody that will pass on the street. We can't turn anybody down.
So, to go back to to where we kind of were before I asked this question, Paul.
Yeah.
What, COVID came, what did it do in your situation? How do you keep smiling and keep joy-filled?
Yeah.
Or not keep joy-filled?
Yeah.
That's where we often talk about in the middle of when things are going maybe not as you expected. So
Yeah.
keep, what's happened after
Tell
these
more the
3
story.
years.
Yeah. Well, I think, there's a number of reflections. I think after the first few years, we did so much. And I think my strength, my gifting, my calling is probably a more apostolic or CEO. Like, I love the idea of starting new things and taking new ground, new territory and everything else like that. But I think sometimes the challenge has been that it was organizationally, so it's almost if you have the CEO, but you need a COO as well to kind of, if you want to, you can't keep advancing without creating more organizational structure. And I think in a church setting that what we kind of the CEO is the apostolic, but maybe the COO is more the kind of the shepherd, the teacher, that can help. And I think we grew too quickly. When I look back at it, I read a really good book by a guy called Will Mancini called Church Unique. And he just talked about the need for really developing the internal culture. Because once you do that, then external growth will come. Whereas I think the gifting of an apostolic or CEO is always external growth, but not always the development of the internal culture. And of that, I think that created tensions with us after the first kind of 4 years, where we weren't as aligned to the vision and the values of who we were because we'd grown too quickly, too soon. And so that brought home a number of issues for us. And it was really tough. I think it was really tough. And then just as we were kind of getting to a better place, and then COVID came. And I remember in January 2020, just before it all really kicked off, I remember preaching on the story of Gideon and God like pruning back the army. And there's sometimes as a preacher, you know that the sermon you're giving just seems really like this is really for us, but I hadn't yet quite worked out why it was for us, but I knew that it was, the Spirit was really on it. And had I known what was coming, I never would have preached on it. But because then everything just got pruned back. I mean, COVID came and it was a really tough season. All the projects went independent. We had to close a cafe down in Aldgate. But I remember that first week in lockdown, and when we had in the UK, I don't know how it was and where you guys are from, but for us, we just there's a few weeks where we just sat at home and couldn't do anything. And I remember just praying. And I just felt the Lord say to me, this will be a time that you will flourish. Just to give a background, I'm an Essex boy. Flourish is not my vocabulary. Like it's, but it was a specific word and I held on to that. And I just felt so, I just held on to that for the next few years, not really knowing what it meant. And because it was flourish, I thought, oh, okay, that means everything's going to get better. So when everything was in closing and we had to pull out of one coffee shop that we had in the centre of London and everything else, I kind of felt like this didn't feel like flourishing, but yet God had given that promise. And then I heard a sermon a few years ago, and he said that the number one emotion that people were feeling during the pandemic, according to the New York Times, was to languish, which was a kind of, like people just didn't have a lot of drive or ambition, or, it was just a kind of like just a bit of a slump. And the word that is directly opposite to languish is to flourish. And I was just blown away how gracious and kind God was to give me a word that was in direct opposition to what the majority of the planet were feeling. God had given me a promise that you will flourish. But yet there was still a lot more pruning in every sense. I think at the beginning of towards the end of 2023, it was just, even a church, it was just me and one other person. And I was like, okay, I don't know where we go from here. But I felt God say, don't give up worshipping, don't give up meeting. And in the last few years, it's incredible just seeing how many people have come to faith. The church is growing and flourishing. Also, during that time, I set up 2 other businesses. So I set up a coffee roastery business called 3 Chords Coffee. And through that, we're training loads of vulnerable adults as baristas, helping them into employment. And I set up a catering company called Emerald Oak. And if you'll indulge with me a little bit more, I just want to share one thing about that I remember during this time of just really praying and worshipping, but this kind of drive to set up these new businesses, I was really like questioning whether I was wrestling with God and like, God, am I not being true to the calling that you've placed on my life? Because I seem to be more into setting up businesses than growing a church. And so I remember being on a prayer retreat and I felt this really hot warmth in the center of my back. But I didn't know what it meant. And so I left that prayer retreat. And then a few weeks later, I was starting to feel a bit anxious about the same thing again, questioning whether I was actually called to be a minister or whether I should just go and do set up businesses. And again, I felt that really hot spot in the middle of my back. And I asked the Lord what it meant. And he gave me the picture of, if you're a child, when they're walking along and they're likely to run off in any direction. And so you put your hand in the middle of their back to guide them in the direction that you want them to go. And I just really believe God was going like, no, this is where I want you to go. And I've got a couple of incredible stories of how through those 2 businesses that I've set up, how we've seen people come to faith. But I'll come back to that in a minute. I don't know. I've talked a lot. I don't know if you've got any questions or thoughts. But yeah.
Bill, please respond. I see you're smiling and all over the place. So
I just think Paul's story is so encouraging, will be encouraging to so many of our listeners. And I'm just particularly appreciative of his both hearing the Lord, wanting to hear the Lord, able, leaning in that direction, and then just doing what the Lord says. That concept in itself is still quite interesting to a lot of our audience. And I think that they would love to know, how does that develop? How did you develop that? I'm just over here smiling at all the fruit of that, going from the hills and the valleys and misinterpreting so many of the valleys, thinking it's a downer time when really it's a preparation time for the redirection. And I'm also just interested in, can we not redefine the term minister?
Yeah.
I was at a conference once and someone came up and said, Pastor Bill, I want you to pray for me. And I almost corrected him. I was preparing the sentence in my mind about, I'm not a pastor, I own a company. And the Lord interrupted me and says, if you own a company, you're a minister. Don't give me that.
Amen. Yeah. I do think often the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, isn't it? And I think we're all called to be ministers or pastors or priests. So well, I mean, for me, the way that I've developed that, Bill, it's just been, I've just always prioritized just one day a month. I get out of London because I can't concentrate. Well, I get distracted easily in London. So I just go out and I just sit in a room and pray, just wait on God. And that's not just, you think, well, of course you are, you're a pastor, but it's like, no, I think if we all did that, the best business decisions and insight have come from just being in a prayer room. a life verse for us has always been from Joshua 3 verse 5. It says, consecrate yourself before the Lord, for tomorrow I will do the extraordinary. And for us, the whole extraordinary that we're seeing today in Kahaila is because when we come out of COVID, all we could do was just consecrate. All we could do was pray. And even as I revisited that scripture in that time, something that really highlighted for me is the Lord said, wait for the Ark of the Covenant to go before you. He said this to Joshua, because you've not been this way before. Basically, he's saying, like, just follow what the Spirit of God is doing. You've not been this way before. So and I think in COVID, like, there's a whole new thing going on for all of us. And we were, like many churches I saw, were trying to get back to doing what they were doing before. But what if COVID was an opportunity for Christians, for the church, for kingdom businesses to wait for the Lord to go before and then follow, because we've not been this way before. And I think we're beginning to see that more and more in this moment when new things are, amazing things are beginning to happen in the church, because we're now not being guided by this is how we've always done church, but being guided by the Spirit, so it's an exciting time.
Well, I think this is right up Bill's alley,
Okay.
He would say, I never saw Jesus initiating something, He's following what the Father wants to do. I'm kind of still struggling with that, because I'm a major initiator.
Okay, yeah.
So how does that work?
Mhm.
But Bill, what do you hear?
Well, one other thought that's passing by, and I'm thinking now primarily of our audience, because so many in our audience, I suspect, are hearing your story and they will apply it to themselves, and they'll say, I don't think I could ever do what Paul did. But one of the characteristics that I just absolutely love of the new covenant, of the kingdom, is that it doesn't depend on our adequacy for anything. That our adequacy comes from God. And that's not just adequacy to live a spiritual life. That's adequacy to roast coffee. It's adequacy to open a bakery. It's whatever we need that he's calling us to. If we follow him, and he said, come this way, and we're stepping in that direction. I just find it so encouraging to realize that my inadequacy is not an excuse to not follow.
Yeah.
And in the process, I learned how very, very adequate he is in everything that we need. Would you say that was also similar to your experience?
Yeah, 100%. I think, like, some people say that, what your gift is, and like, you're an entrepreneur or you're a social entrepreneur. And I think, if I'm honest, I think my main gift is faith. It's just like, we can do anything, like, because if God's in it, and because I knew nothing about coffee, I knew nothing about running a coffee shop, I knew nothing about a bakery, I knew nothing about coffee roastery but I just think, no, I feel this is where the Lord is going, and the faith, but we'll work it out. And incredibly, God's provision always comes when we step out in faith. It has always come when we step out in faith.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when I remember with the bakery, when we first started that, we knew nothing about baking, but there was this young girl. She wanted to do a year out, and she'd gone, and loads of churches had gone, oh yeah, come and help out with the youth group. And she said, no, but I'm really into baking. And so then she heard what we were doing, and so she phoned up and said, could I come and do a year out with you guys, because I love baking? And so I said, yeah, sure, come. She just won the Cambridge Bake Off. And so overnight, the standard of our baked products just went to a whole new level. But because she was 18, no one was taking her seriously in that way. And so, again, time and time again, I can share stories of how, like, there's things we knew nothing about, but I said, okay, let's do it. And then God just provided exactly what we need when we needed it. So, and that.
We are already over time.
Okay.
Time goes quick.
Yeah.
But I love this ending, faith. I know myself that when I joined Mercy Ships was 21, or actually even before that, believing, hey, I have this little basket with a bit of bread and a little bit of fish. Lord, here's my life. Will you multiply it?
Yeah.
And when I think back, man, I come from shipping background, my education was scrubbing the decks.
Yeah.
And, it's incredible that I'm like, wow, am I doing these podcasts? I just had a had this conversation or this message from someone saying, "Hey, I'm starting a podcast. I love what you're doing and how you're doing it." But I'm like, of course, there is experience, but it's just, I think when we say, "Lord, here's my life," I think He can bring out that potential, or like you say, bring people. I'm just starting this new project and a new book, and I'm like, I'm grateful that I hear this. I need to remind it, because it's a pretty big project, you know. But to step out in faith and to trust God. But listeners, so we are in the end of our time together, but we will have another episode with Paul, because he also has some dreams for the future, for his area, for London. I would love to hear more about it. So I will drag all of your listeners along, because I like to hear about it.
Okay.
And I think, seeing Bill smile, I think he would like another conversation with Paul. So thank you for this time, Paul, and for sharing a bit about Kahaila. We will, put a link in the text so they can find you. And, for those who might be able, you will be coming to the Netherlands to speak, to be one of the keynote speakers at our Congress in November 12th, 13th. So everybody, welcome to the Netherlands.
Amen. I look forward to that.
Okay, Bill, I would like you to close with the last word to our listeners.
Well, I just keep thinking of all the people listening and who have probably been hearing the Lord draw them into something new, to be encouraged that what Paul's talking about is happening all over the world. There's BAM organizations in multiple different countries now that didn't exist 20 years ago. So if you sense that the Lord is pulling you into something and you felt you are not qualified, not capable, don't let that stop you. None of us have been capable for the things that the Lord has called us into, but He's totally capable for everything. So I just encourage you to pay attention to what you think might be the voice of God and lean in that direction. Follow Paul's example of getting one day a month, and getting away and just putting yourself before the Lord and speaking and listening throughout the whole day and worshiping, and just see what comes out of that. Thank you, Paul, very much, both your testimony and the story that you shared with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you. Well, listeners, see you in 2 weeks' time.
Kingdom Mindsets for Business cohort starts September 23rd.